What happens when Britain's most controversial royal meets television's most outspoken host? The answer is an unforgettable clash as Prince Harry squares off with Sharon Osbourne. What began as a polite conversation quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations daytime television has ever seen. The tension was evident the moment Harry stepped onto the view set. No one could have predicted the meltdown that followed. Last night's episode was meant to highlight Harry's charitable work and upcoming projects. Producers had expected a straightforward discussion focused on veterans and mental health advocacy. Instead, the interview turned into a lesson in how fast things can unravel when Sharon Osbourne decides to call out what she views as royal hypocrisy. Backstage, the atmosphere was already uneasy. Sources revealed that Harry's team had issued a strict list of banned topics. No mention of King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, the Netflix series, or his controversial memoir. Sharon, however, had no intention of following those rules. As Harry settled in, nervously adjusting his tie, Sharon fixed her eyes on him. Her co-hosts exchanged wary glances, sensing the charged energy. The opening segment ran smoothly, with Harry speaking about his foundation's work with wounded veterans. His answers were polished and diplomatic, just as his media training had prepared him. But Sharon was waiting for her moment. "It's wonderful to hear about your charity work, Harry," she began, her tone deceptively sweet. "Really admirable. But I have to ask, and I think our viewers deserve to know, how do you reconcile this image of supporting veterans with what many see as your abandonment of your own military family back home?" The question landed like a thunderclap. Harry's composed expression faltered briefly before he regained control. The other hosts shifted uneasily, realizing Sharon had crossed the line Harry's team had drawn. But this was precisely her plan. "I think that's an unfair characterization, Sharon," Harry replied, his accent sharpening under pressure. "My commitment to veterans has never wavered, regardless of geography or family matters." Sharon's laugh cut through the tension. "Geography? Family matters? That's quite the euphemism for turning your back on everything you once stood for, isn't it?" She shuffled her notes theatrically. "Let me remind you of those circumstances you're so quick to dismiss." The studio air grew heavier. Cameras zoomed in on Harry's face, catching every flicker of emotion as Sharon pressed on. His jaw tightened, his hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckled force. "You served your country with honor for 10 years, Sharon continued, her voice gathering speed. "You stood with men and women who bled for the crown you now disparage. They respected you, followed you into battle, and now you're here in a Hollywood studio, cashing Netflix checks while attacking those same institutions." Harry's training was tested to its limit. Every instinct told him to strike back, but he knew losing his temper would only validate Sharon's point. He steadied himself. "My service record speaks for itself," he said firmly, his voice calm but edged with restrained anger. "I have never forgotten my brothers and sisters in arms, and I never will," Harry said firmly. "What I have done is choose to speak truth to power, something that makes people very uncomfortable." Sharon seized on his words instantly. "Truth to power? Is that what we're calling it now?" she asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm as she turned toward the audience, inviting them to share in what she framed as royal delusion. "Let me tell you about truth, Harry. The truth is, you had everything, absolutely everything, handed to you on a silver platter, and you threw it away because you couldn't handle a little criticism from the British press." The accusation lingered like smoke from a gun. Harry's composure began to crack, genuine emotion flickering across his face for the first time. His breathing grew shallow, and a muscle in his cheek twitched. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said, his diplomatic mask slipping. "You don't understand what my family went through, what my wife endured. Or the impossible position we were put in by an institution that cared more about protecting its image than its people? Sharon's eyes lit with satisfaction. She had succeeded in drawing Harry away from his rehearsed answers and into raw emotion, exactly where she wanted him. "Your wife?" Sharon repeated, feigning surprise. "Oh, you mean the woman who married into the most privileged family on earth, and then spent years complaining about how hard her life was? The same woman who claimed the royal family was racist, yet conveniently never named names or incidents that could be verified." The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, aware they were capturing something unprecedented. Harry's face stiffened, his eyes flashing with a dangerous intensity that signaled Sharon had crossed a line. But she pressed forward. "Let's talk about privilege, shall we?" Sharon continued, her voice commanding. "You were born into a life most people could only dream of. Private jets, luxury homes, bodyguards, the best education money can buy. And yet here you sit, trying to convince the world you're the victim." Harry's hands clenched into fists on the armrests, his breathing heavy. The other hosts remained stunned, the audience unusually silent, watching the confrontation unfold in real time. "Victim?" Harry's voice cracked under the weight of emotion. "You think this is about playing the victim? This is about protecting my family from the same machine that killed my mother. This is about refusing to let history repeat itself, while people like you sit in judgment of things you'll never understand." The mention of Princess Diana sent shockwaves through the studio. Sharon's expression faltered, but only for a moment. She quickly pressed on, her tone dropping to a menacing whisper. "Don't you dare," she said coldly. "Don't you dare use your mother's memory to excuse your betrayal of everything she stood for. Diana had her issues with the royal family, but she never abandoned her duty. She never ran away to California to make Netflix shows and write tell-all books for money." Harry shot to his feet so suddenly, his chair nearly toppled over. The movement rippled through the studio as security tensed, unsure whether it was simply dramatic or the beginning of something more. "How dare you speak about my mother?" Harry roared, his voice echoing through the studio with raw intensity. "You didn't know her. You don't know what she went through, what she sacrificed, or what she wanted for her sons." Harry shot back. Sharon stayed seated, calm and calculating, unfazed by the storm she had unleashed. She had achieved exactly what she intended. She had broken through Harry's carefully constructed public persona and exposed the raw emotion beneath, and she wasn't finished. "I know she wouldn't have wanted her son to become a professional victim," Sharon said coolly, her words cutting like a blade. "I know she wouldn't have wanted you to abandon your responsibilities and sell your family's private business to the highest bidder. And I certainly know she wouldn't have wanted you to use her memory as a shield every time someone questions your choices." Her words struck Harry like blows. His face shifted through rage, hurt, disbelief, and something dangerously close to despair. The cameras captured every flicker of his unraveling, producing television that would replay endlessly across social media and news outlets. "You're crossing a line." "Sharon!" One of the other hosts finally interjected, her voice trembling as she realized the show had spun completely out of control. "Maybe we should take a commercial break." "No!" Sharon snapped, not even glancing her way, her gaze locked on Harry. "I think the viewers deserve to hear the truth for once, instead of the polished version his PR team always feeds them. They deserve to know what kind of man abandons his family, his country, and his duty, because life got a little difficult." Harry's composure collapsed. Years of media training and image control evaporated as frustration and rage boiled to the surface. "Difficult?" Harry screamed, his voice breaking. "You call my wife being systematically destroyed by the British press difficult? You call threats to my newborn son's security difficult? You call being told my mixed-race children wouldn't receive the same protections as other royal grandchildren difficult?" The revelation detonated like a bomb. Even Sharon faltered briefly at the raw pain and fury in his words. But the damage was done. To Harry's image, and to any chance of salvaging the interview. "So now we're playing the race card," Sharon said with weary disdain, as if Harry had confirmed her worst suspicions. "How predictable. When all else fails, when you can't defend your actions, you cry racism. It's the oldest trick in the victim playbook." The accusation hit like a slap. Harry's eyes widened with shock and disbelief at her casual dismissal of his family's suffering. The studio fell into a silence so deep that the hum of the air conditioning seemed deafening. "You're unbelievable," Harry whispered, his voice low but seething with venom. "Absolutely unbelievable. You sit there in your privilege, never having endured a fraction of the scrutiny or pressure my family has faced, and you have the audacity to dismiss our experiences as playing cards." Sharon leaned back with the smug satisfaction of someone who had accomplished exactly what they set out to do. She had stripped away Harry's defenses, forced him into unguarded honesty, and created a television moment destined to be dissected for years. "I'm stating facts," Sharon replied calmly, her composure a sharp contrast to Harry's visible distress. "The fact is, you had everything and threw it away. Instead of working within the system to create change, you chose to burn it down and profit from the ashes. And now you sit here justifying those choices by painting yourself and your family as victims of circumstances millions would call blessings." Harry stood frozen, chest heaving, hands trembling, as he fought to restrain himself from crossing a line that could make an already catastrophic moment worse. The cameras rolled, capturing every flicker of his struggle. But Sharon still had one last weapon. One final strike pushed the confrontation past the point of no return, carrying consequences that would reach far beyond the studio walls. "You know what I find most disturbing about all of this, Harry?" Sharon said, her voice dripping with mock concern that cut deeper than any direct attack. "It's not just that you've abandoned your family and your country. It's that you've weaponized your trauma, commodified your pain, and turned your mother's death into a brand. You've built an entire industry on being Princess Diana's grieving son. And frankly, it's grotesque." The words hit Harry like a bolt of lightning. His face drained of color, then flushed red with such fury that people in the studio flinched. The accusation was so brutal, so carefully aimed to cause maximum psychological damage, that even Sharon's co-hosts looked stunned at the cruelty. "Stop," Harry whispered, his voice low but sharp enough to freeze the room. "Just stop talking." But Sharon pressed on. She had built her career on fearlessness, on saying what others dared not, and she wasn't about to back down now. "Diana's death was a tragedy that shook the world," she continued, her tone hardening as she delivered what she clearly intended as the killing blow. "But you've turned that tragedy into your meal ticket. Every interview, every documentary, every book deal. It all circles back to your mother's death and how it scarred poor little Harry. You've made millions from her memory, and yet you dare lecture others about exploitation." The studio erupted. Harry's security moved closer, sensing he was on the edge of something dangerous. The other hosts spoke over one another, desperately trying to pull the moment back under control, but it was like trying to stop a hurricane with bare hands. "You're sick," Harry said, his voice trembling with raw, primal emotion. "Truly sick. To accuse me of profiting from my mother's death, a woman who died when I was 12, who I never knew as an adult, who never met her grandchildren, is beyond disgusting. It's inhuman." Tears ran down his face, but they weren't from sorrow. They burned with rage, the kind that erupts when someone is pushed past their breaking point. "I'm stating facts," Sharon replied coolly, unmoved by the storm she had unleashed. "Every major decision you've made since leaving the royal family has been marketed around your mother's story. The Oprah interview, the Netflix deal, the memoir. They all hinge on Diana's death and how it shaped your trauma. You've built a multi-million-dollar empire on that tragedy." Harry wiped his face with the back of his hand, and when he looked up, the pain was gone, replaced by something cold and deliberate. He had made a decision with consequences that would ripple far beyond that studio. "You want to talk about my mother?" Harry said, his voice suddenly calm, steady, and more frightening than his earlier outburst. "Let me tell you about her. She spent her last years hunted by photographers who cared more about a perfect shot than her humanity. She died in a Paris tunnel because people saw her as nothing but a commodity. And now I'm sitting across from someone doing the same thing. You're exploiting tragedy for ratings. You're turning human suffering into entertainment. You're everything that destroyed her, and you don't even see it." For the first time that day, Sharon looked shaken. Maybe she realized she had gone too far, crossed a line that couldn't be undone. But it was too late. "The difference," Harry continued, his voice rising with each word, "is that when I share my story, I'm trying to stop others from enduring what my family went through. When you exploit it, you're feeding the same machine that destroyed her in the first place." Sharon opened her mouth to answer, but Harry cut her off with a gesture that was final and dismissive. "I'm done," he said, pulling off his microphone and setting it on the chair. "I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with this show. And I'm done with people like you who treat basic human decency as optional when ratings are on the line." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at Sharon one last time. His face was no longer angry, only weary, drained of everything but disappointment. "You know what the real tragedy is, Sharon?" he said. "You had the chance to have a meaningful conversation about issues that matter. Veterans' mental health, support for military families, things that could actually change lives. Instead, you chose to make it a circus for your own amusement." "Harry, wait!" Sharon finally spoke, but it was too late. "No," he said firmly. "I've waited long enough. I've spent my adult life waiting for people like you to remember there are real human beings behind the headlines. I'm done waiting." With that, Prince Harry walked off the View set, leaving behind silence and a host who had gotten exactly what she wanted: viral content that would dominate headlines for weeks. But the cost was already becoming clear. The cameras kept rolling as Sharon sat alone at the desk, her co-hosts having followed Harry backstage in an attempt to salvage the moment. For the first time in her career, Sharon Osbourne seemed utterly lost for words. She had won the battle, goading Harry into the kind of emotional collapse that would bring millions of views. But as she stared at the empty chair where he had sat minutes earlier, the question lingered. Had the victory come at too high a price? The interview was over, but the fallout was only beginning. In under half an hour, Sharon had created one of the most explosive moments in daytime TV history. But she had also revealed something about herself that couldn't be undone. The world now knew how far she would go for entertainment, and that revelation would shadow her for the rest of her career. As the studio lights dimmed and the crew packed up, one thing was certain: this clash would be remembered, debated, and replayed for years to come. Sharon Osbourne had broken Prince Harry on live television, but in doing so, she had also broken something in herself that could never be restored.